Go ahead, Ms. Crumbley.
I sit here today to express my deepest sorrow for the families of Hannah, Tate, Madison, Justin, and to all those affected on November 30th, 2021. The driving weight this has taken on my heart and soul cannot be expressed into words. Just as I know there is nothing I can say that's going to ease the pain and suffering of the victims and their families. There's a quote I heard that rang true. Grief. For those of you who understand, no explanation is needed. And for those of us who do not, no description is possible. I've taken countless nights of lament over the anguish and shame I carry, knowing what my son did, the harm he caused to innocent lives, the families, and to the entire Oxford community. I pray all the victims are the embodiment of God's mercy and peace, and that He heals your broken spirits. When I was on the stand, I was asked if I would have done anything different. I was horrified to learn my answer I would not have was completely misunderstood. That answer is true because my son did seem so normal. I didn't have a reason to do anything different. This was not something I foresaw. That was the intention of my answer and how I interpreted the question. With the benefit of hindsight and the information I have now, my answer would be drastically different. If I even thought my son could be capable of crimes like these, things would have absolutely been different. Even worse, when I learned during the police investigation that he had been planning a school shooting before November 30th. He was not the son I woke up. He was not the son I knew when I woke up on November 30th. The Ethan I knew was a good, quiet kid. He loved his pets, family vacations. My husband and I used to say we had the perfect kid. I truly believed that, and that's who I saw and thought I knew. As the details started emerging during discovery, I was horrified to learn concerning behaviors my son was reported doing at school. Refusing to take a makeup test he told us he took. Sleeping in class. Drawing pictures of guns on his assignments. Writing, quote, "My family is a mistake." Watching a video in class of a mass shooting that fatal day, along with internal communications that took place between his teachers and counselor, Mr. Hopkins. That he is, quote, "on my radar," and, quote, "he seems to be having a rough time," was never disclosed to us, his parents. The school claimed this was not abnormal behavior because of the pandemic and Oxford being a, quote, gun community. To say I was furious to learn this information is an understatement. This is not normal behavior to us and very different than what Ethan led us to believe was happening at school. Not only were you left in the dark about previous concerning behavior, but in the counselor's office that morning, none of those previous issues were brought to our attention. I can't stop thinking, had they been, the conversation that morning would have been much different. That we would have taken a deep dive into what's really been going on with my son. I wonder if Hopkins and EJAC have those same regrets too. Instead, we are led to believe, not only from Hopkins and EJAC, but from Ethan as well, that this was an isolated event. We felt confident in trusting the professional's advice to let him stay in school that day. Quote, he does not pose a threat to himself or others. It was suggested that him being around peers would probably be good. We agreed. We were never asked to take him home that day. If that was discussed as the best course of action, we would have obliged. The prosecution keeps saying we didn't give them the big picture that morning in the counselor's office. But what they failed to acknowledge is the bigger picture the school did not give us. I'm not the same person I was prior to November 30th, 2021. This tragedy has changed who I am and has taught me some very valuable lessons. It said in suffering we gain wisdom. I've also gained God. In the quiet hours of myself, I prayed to Him about the deep impact this tragedy has had on the families and the endless pain no one should ever have to feel. For it is God who holds a true understanding of our pain. I've also learned to depend on Him for peace and strength. Alone, I'm not strong enough. I've learned that we cannot tell or predict what will happen to us in this life. One day you wake up and everything can change. We can, however, decide what happens in us, how we take it, what we do with it. And that's what really matters in the end. That's the test of living, is how we take the unimaginable, the tragedies, the raw hardships, and make them a thing of worth and beauty. I've also learned to never think this could not happen to you, and stereotype that bad kids come from bad parents. The prosecution has tried to mold us into the type of parents society wants to believe are so horrible, only a school or mass shooter could be bred from. This is a very simple assumption to have. We were good parents. We were the average family. We weren't perfect, but we loved our son and each other tremendously. Everything we strived for was to make sure our son had the best life we could give him, to grow up with traditions and experiences we had, to be the best person he could be. I know we did our best. The love I have for our son, mixed with regret for not seeing what was ahead, weighs heavily on me. My point is, this could be any parent up here in my shoes. Ethan could be your child, could be your grandchild, your niece, your nephew, your brother, your sister. Your child can make a fatal decision, not just with a gun, but a knife, a vehicle, intentionally or unintentionally. If there's anything the general public can take away from this, is that this could happen to you too. The tragedy has taught me the true meaning of unconditional love, as I watch my parents still love and care for me wholeheartedly, no matter what has happened. If there's nothing else I can do right in life, I do still love my son unconditionally, and perhaps that is my purpose. Your Honor, I don't envy the decision you have to make today. I understand this is a novel case, and punishment expectations are high, not just from the prosecution, but from all those affected as well. The heartbreaking journey these families have endured. Hang on, I have to back up. I missed my most important. I need to cross. The most valuable piece of wisdom I gained is the power of forgiveness. To forgive the prosecution for the slander and hate against me and my husband. Ms. McDonald, Mr. Keast, I have hated you with deep anger, but hate is too heavy of a cross to carry. I need to be set free of that burden and recognize that you are people just like me, imperfect, but a child of God. I know He wants good things to happen to you, and in any conflict, whatever the circumstances, He is there loving both sides. To the victims and the families, I stand today not to ask for your forgiveness, as I know it may be beyond reach, but to express my sincerest apologies for the pain that has been caused. Your Honor, I don't envy you in the decision you have to make today. I understand the punishment expectations are high from all sides. This heartbreaking journey the families have endured is more than anyone should have to bear and acknowledge in its full depth. My time in confinement has been filled with deep remorse, regret, and grief over this tragedy. I have taken this one day at a time, trying to survive, navigate, and cope with the endless heartache, pain, and grief I feel for the families of Hannah, Justin, Madison, and Tate. I have also lost myself over my son's wrongdoing. I've been shredded by the public opinion of me, shamed as a horrible parent, pained to be a terrible person. But the worst hell I carry is my own self-judgment, remorse, and deep regret. I've been criticized I don't show emotion, I'm unsympathetic, I don't cry enough, but alone I grieve. And if you were to look into me internally, you'd find I've died on the inside. I will be in my own internal prison for the rest of my life. Your Honor, I ask you to take consideration that I have been locked in a cell 23 hours a day, essentially in solitary confinement, for over 28 months, and that the court finds a fair and just sentence for me.
Thank you.
We are about to hear from James Crumbley now giving his statement.
Before I address this court directly, I want to do something that I have never been able to do throughout this time until now. I want to say I can't imagine the pain and agony that for the families that have lost their children and what they're experiencing and what they're going through. As a parent, our biggest fear is losing our child or our children. And to lose a child is unimaginable. My heart is really broken for everybody involved. I understand my words are not going to bring any comfort. I understand that they're not going to relieve any pain. And quite frankly, they probably just don't believe me. However, I really want the families of Madison Baldwin, Hannah St. Juliana, Tate Meyer, Mir, and Justin Schilling to know how truly sorry I am and how devastated I was when I heard what happened to them. I have cried for you and the loss of your children more times than I can count. I know your pain and loss will never go away. Part of you will be missing forever. But please know that I am truly very sorry. I am sorry for your loss as a result of what my son did. I cannot express how much I wish that I had known what was going on with him or what was going to happen. Because I absolutely would have done a lot of things differently. Again, my heart pours out to every single one of you. It really does. Judge Matthews, I'm not gonna overdo a lot of things that were already said. But I know the full amount of pressure that you have on you and the responsibility that has been placed on you throughout this case. I have the utmost respect for you, and I'm simply going to ask that you sentence me in a fair and just way. You presided over my trial and heard the evidence that was presented against me. You know that what my son did, I was not aware of, or that he was planning it, or that he obtained access to the firearms in my house. There was absolutely no evidence that suggested that. As my attorney has told you, I've been on lockdown for 23 hours a day. I've not been able to speak to my son since November 30th, and I have not been able to speak with my wife since December 3rd. I know that I have experienced pales in compassion to what those families who've lost their children and countless other victims experience every day because of what my son did. But I want you to know I too grieve for everyone, as I have explained. For everyone that's been affected by what my son pled guilty to doing. And I'll continue to feel this pain for the rest of my life as well. If I could go back and change things, if I could go back and do things differently, and maybe none of us would be here today. So again, I ask Your Honor to impose a just and fair sentence based on the truth. about what you heard during my trial. I'm asking the court to sentence me to time served and place me on probation for the maximum time allowed with the GPS tether for as long as the court deems necessary. I also want to address one last thing. And that's to what Tate Mears' dad said. It is time that we all know the truth. We have been prohibited from telling the whole truth. The whole truth has not been told. And I'm with you, Mr. Meir. I too want the truth. Because you have not had it. You have not had the truth at all. The truth has not been presented to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crumbley.
We're hearing from the judge in the sentencing of Jennifer and James Crumbley, the parents of Ethan Crumbley, who was convicted in the school shooting at Oxford, Michigan.
Louder and was ignored. No one answered. And these two people should have and sure didn't. Mr. Crumbley, it's clear to this court that because of you, there was unfettered access to a gun or guns, as well as ammunition in your home. You characterized yourself as a martyr and threatened the well-being of the prosecutor. Mrs. Crumbley, you glorified the use and possession of these weapons. Your attitude toward your son and his behaviors was dispassionate and apathetic. Your response to school staff after a 12-minute meeting was, "Are we done here?" During your trial, you announced that you wouldn't do anything different. I understand that that might have been misinterpreted, but it did cut the victims deep. Because of both of your actions and inaction, among many, many other things, the world is missing out on a top college university will miss out on Tate's star quality football skills. I met Raina, who's wise beyond her years, and she's told us that among many, many other things, community will be denied Hannah's kindness, creativity, and sense of humor. Among many, many other things the world will miss is Madison's kind and loving soul and the light that reflected her beauty both inside and out. Although a hero in death because of his organ donations that helped so many, we will never know where Justin, an excellent student with vast skills and interests, described as a mentor and a leader, would have left his giant imprint. The impact statements given here and the written statements provided to the court describe the cataclysmic impact the deaths of these children have had on their children. With regard to each defendant, this court has spent night and day thinking about this case, as you can imagine. I've prayed about this case, I've thought about this case, and I've considered the possibility for rehabilitation, the need to protect society, the penalty appropriate to the conduct and goal of deterring others from similar conduct. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation reports. I am, of course, sadly familiar with the facts and circumstances of these cases, as well as those surrounding each defendant. The advisory sentencing guidelines in this matter do not capture the catastrophic impact of the acts or inaction in these matters. The guidelines do not take into account the complete lack of insight both defendants have for their behavior to this very day. The guidelines do not account for the severity of the circumstances in this matter. The guidelines ignore the survivors, including shooting victims Phoebe Arthur, Elijah Mueller, Riley Franz, Kylie Osage, John Asciutto, Molly Darnell, and Aiden Watson. They were deeply wounded, both physically and emotionally. In addition to the 7 wounded, each of the defendants' gross negligence has caused unimaginable suffering to hundreds of others as a result of what happened that day. Each act or inaction created a ripple effect. Therefore, an out-of-guidelines sentence is appropriate and proportional. The court uses the useful tool of the legislative guidelines, which embody the principles of proportionality, while also taking into account the nature of the offense and the background of each defendant. I believe that the following sentences would be in the best interest of justice and are reasonable and proportionate to the seriousness of the matter and the circumstances surrounding each defendant. With regard to Jennifer Crumbley, it is the sentence of this court, Ms. Crumbley, that you serve 10 to 15 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections. You will have credit for 858 days. State costs are $272. There's a crime victims' rights fee of $130. You and your agents may not have any contact with the families of Madison Baldwin, Tate Meir, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling. I will issue another ruling with regard to contact with your son, the shooter. Excuse me. As to defendant James Crumbley, it is the sentence of this court that you serve 10 to 15 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections, that you receive credit for 858 days, that you pay state costs in the matter of $272, that there is a crime victims' rights fee of $130, that you or your agents have no contact with the families of Madison Baldwin, Tate Meir, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling. Ms. Wheeler, have I left anything out with regard to sentencing? No restitution has been requested by any of the families at this time, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. I would like to advise both defendants that you are entitled to appellate review of your conviction and sentence, including that the sentence exceeds the guideline range. This is done by filing a claim of appeal by right, or when you are not entitled to file a claim of appeal by right, an application for leave to appeal. If you cannot afford to hire an attorney to represent you on appeal, and you request an attorney may be appointed for you. You may request an attorney by completing the request for appointment of attorney section of the form that will be provided for you, and by returning the form to this court or to the Michigan Assigned Counsel System at the address on the form. If you wish to preserve your automatic right to appeal, the form must be received within 42 days after sentencing. If you do not submit the form within 42 days from today, you may still file an application for leave to appeal if the form is received within 6 months after sentencing. Do each of the defendants acknowledge receipt of their appellate rights?
James acknowledges receipt, Your Honor. He's completing the form as we speak.
Your Honor, my client is as well. Would the court like the forms here, or would you prefer us to?
It doesn't matter.
We have been listening to the quite historic sentencing for James and Jennifer Crumbley. Both received 10 to 15 years in prison, but they have more than 800 days off of time served, which, according to my calculations here, is just over 2 years and 2 months each, meaning that they could still spend a significant time in prison. Nikki Batiste continues here with us in Studio 57. Nikki, you've been following this case. What was the sentence that we were expecting today? How close does this get to that? Is this kind of maximum?
I think it's hard to say what anyone was expecting. I think that people felt the judge could send a message today, and she did. She minced no words. She talked about how much she, Judge Cheryl Matthews, thought about this case. What struck me is there are state guidelines for sentencing, and I believe in this case it might have been around 8 years for a sentence. And the judge was talking about how those state guidelines for sentencing in this case did not take into account James and Jennifer's account of what they did, their negligence, she said. And she also talked about the unimaginable suffering of the victim. So she went as far as she could today, the judge, and I think that her message will be heard loud and clear across the country. Yeah. And hopefully parents will pay attention to their children across the board and their mental health.
I want to bring in also Dante Mills, who joins us. Dante, from what I understand, the maximum, and as Nikki was saying, was 15 years. That's what we walked into today. Now she's sentencing, the judge is sentencing both parents to 10 to 15 with credit for just over 2 years, 2 months. what does 10 to 15 years mean? What happens now?
This is groundbreaking. This means that the judge wanted to make a statement and make it absolutely clear that they should be punished to the highest extent possible. She talked about going beyond the guidelines in this case, and she did. But what this means is these people were sentenced to 10 to 15 years for essentially being bad parents. And that's what this means. So you have to look at where does this lead us as a country? Now will prosecutors go after parents not only for mass shootings, but say individual murders, or if their child robs somebody or steals something, will they be responsible if they did not take enough action to prevent their child from doing that or recognize that their child was capable of it? I think this is a groundbreaking sentence. I think there's absolutely going to be implications on both sides. Hopefully parents pay more attention, but it does open up prosecutors to be able to not only prosecute the person who committed the crime, but the person responsible for the person who committed the crime. And this is the first time that this kind of thing is happening in this country. And there's going to be a lot of fallout from this.
Well, that brings me, I kind of, before I ask you the next question, I kind of want to remind viewers of some of the details in this case. I mean, he had expressed in journals, and Nikki, you can tell me a little bit about more about this, but I recall that he had shown signs of needing mental health assistance. The day of the shooting, the school called the parents, showed them drawings that showed a gun, bodies with blood all over them, and a lot of other signs of violence that he, as I mentioned before, he went on the run. I mean, there were all of these signs. And so when we think about, will any parent now be held liable for the crimes of their child? Nikki, if you can walk us through some of those other very specific and alarming indications that they could have done something and why they're being charged for involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, Ethan Crumbley wrote in journals about, literally in capitals, needing help, struggling, suffering, feeling paranoia, seeing, I believe he said he told his mom he saw a demon in their house and clothes flying everywhere. Clear signs of some sort of mental instability. But I think what has always struck me in this case, and again, this judge took into consideration today, as you mentioned earlier, these parents tried to flee the state when they were first being looked at as, for potential criminal charges. These parents, yes, it was legal that James Crumbley bought his son a gun, and it was legal to take him to a gun range, but James Crumbley did not securely store the firearm, and that is how his son got it and took it to his school. But what has always troubled me in this case, and I think I'm positively what helped convict them, is that the school officials called in these parents and said, look what your son drew on this piece of paper today. As you said, a gun, bullets. He noted on it, he wrote blood everywhere. And he wrote
a drawing with a body.
My life doesn't matter, I believe was the other statement.
And a body with blood
like,
around.
And the school said, we think you should take him home. And they said no. And I think that is where that dismissing of school officials and concern is really the crux of this case. Because had they listened, there's a very good chance that all of those students would be alive and none would have been injured.
And I remember part of the defense, Jennifer Crumbley had said, well, I couldn't just take him to work, or I couldn't take time off work. Well, they had her boss as a witness who said, no, she could have taken the time off. She could have brought him to work, so he didn't have to be on his own that day. And so there's a lot of these specific facts of the case that I think, if you're a parent out there just wondering if I miss some signs, will I be facing 15 years? Perhaps this is a very specific case. Dante, I want to bring you back in. Do you think that, given everything that we've said, they have a solid, either parent or both, case for an appeal?
I don't think so. I think the judge really thought this through. She made that clear. I also think the jury really thought this through. They had all of the facts that you just talked about, and a lot of those facts were alarming, that they did have an opportunity. They were called to the school, and they refused to take the child home. I don't think that there's going to be an appeals court that overrules the jury's reading of the facts here, and I think this verdict and this sentence is going to stand. We'll see how far this goes. I know the family talked about also looking at people in the school who had the same circumstances and saw the same things that day and really didn't do much about it. So we'll see if this goes further. But I think what's happened so far with these parents is going to stand.
Wow. I mean, this is just such a unique case, and I think the eyes of the nation and of parents all over, everywhere, are paying attention to this. And it's also, from the legal system, an effort, given that it's so hard to pass any kind of gun control law. So I imagine that that weighs in, too. Thank you so much for joining us, Nikki and Dante. Thank you for your insight.